Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I did a video yesterday about how a gentleman was driving down the road in his truck and the police were driving behind him and they ran his plate and discovered that the truck was plated to somebody with a revoked driver's license. They then pulled the truck over and discovered that the man with the revoked driver's license, who had the truck registered, was also the man behind the wheel. And so they arrested him as a result for driving on a revoked license. And I talked about how that case made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, Glover versus Kansas. I put a link in the description below. And I had quite a few people say, but Steve, they had no probable cause to run the plate in the first place. What's up with that? And here's the thing. The police can run your plate anytime they want. They don't need probable cause. They don't need reasonable suspicion. And the thing is that so many people in our society think that you've got like unlimited rights. You know, this is America. I've got rights. Yeah, you've got rights. You've got rights. But they're not as wide-ranging as you think if you think that a police officer can't look at your license plate as you drive down the road. And that's the thing. So I'm going to back this up and try to explain as clearly as I can why it is that the police can run your plate anytime they want. And there's actually nothing wrong with that, okay? And then there's also actually a bigger problem that everyone's missing, which makes the running the plate thing trivial by comparison. And if you stick with me, you'll understand. So the first question is that people say, Steve, I have a right to privacy. I have a right to privacy. First of all, you don't have an explicit right to privacy. There are things that suggest you have something similar to a right to privacy, but the right to privacy does not exist in the Constitution, at least not using those words. There are things saying that you got rights that protect you. But what we're getting at is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So that's the right you have. You've got the right to be secure in your person, your house, your papers, and your effects. Okay? Now, that's against unreasonable searches and seizures. And most people skip over the word unreasonable. So we're not talking about seizures here. We're talking about searches, all right? So police officer runs your plate. Is that a search? Is that a search, right? Well, remember the word is preceded with unreasonable. And as you're driving down the road on a public roadway in a vehicle that has a license plate on it, the license plate is publicly displayed. Anybody can see it. So to suggest the police can't look at it is obviously insane. Anybody can look at it. I read license plates all the time. If I see an out-of-state plate, I make a mental note. Hey, license plate from Hawaii. That's an unusual thing to see in mainland U.S. A license plate from Maine. They're a long way from home. License plate from Florida. And so on and so on. So the point is that you can look at the plate all day long. So the unreasonable search, if there was an unreasonable search, must be that the police officer looked at your license plate and said, oh, your license plate number is FIN073, and then typed it into a database to see who it came back to. Or there are now devices that allow police officers to do this, and it's automated. There's simply a license plate reader that can read the license plates and will immediately scan them, run them through a database, and kick out whether that that plate is attached to, figuratively speaking, has like outstanding warrants. Okay, so that is what's going on here. So the search is not them looking at your car. The search is something they're doing on their own in their car, ironically, and they're searching a database. Now the question is them searching a database an unreasonable search? And the courts have overwhelmingly ruled it's not. Number one, it's not intrusive. You don't even know it's being done. It's happened to you. It has happened to you. And I've spoken to police officers about this. I've also had a police officer in the old days, without one of the automatic readers, following me for a little while and then peel off. I guarantee you they ran my plate. Now, was it intrusive? I thought it was more intrusive to have the guy following me. But him running my license plate through a database that's run by the government is not intrusive to me, especially because I don't even know about it. How can that be intrusive? But the biggest problem really is that people confuse all the different standards. Like, obviously, if you have to be found guilty of a crime, you got to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? And for them to arrest you, they need probable cause. And for them to pull you over, they need reasonable suspicion. And just in case you don't catch this, I was harping on unreasonable in front of searches before. I'm now talking about reasonable suspicion. And the fact that they put those words in front, unreasonable and reasonable, is that if they didn't say reasonable suspicion, they could just pull you over with a suspicion. Well, that'd be that any suspicion would count. So reasonable implies that they need to have a reason, a basis for their suspicion. And as the Supreme Court noted in Glover, they don't need overwhelming evidence. They simply need a suspicion that's based on reason. And that's substantially lower than probable cause. Probable cause implies more than 50%. If it's probable, right, it's going to be more likely than not. And so reasonable means there's a reason. It can be below 50%. And I had people say, well, what if someone else is driving the vehicle? They get pulled over, they hand the license plate, the driver's license over, and the guy goes, oh, you're licensed, go. So yeah, they were stopped temporarily, and then they were let go. So again, the law talks about probable cause as being the higher standard, but that's not necessary to pull somebody over. It's reasonable suspicion to pull somebody over. So the question then is, what would be unreasonable about the search of a database, government database that you're a part of? When you get the license plate and you give the information and proper registration, all that, there's a database that your state maintains with all that information in it. So for a police officer to enter that database and look something up, is that an unreasonable search? Is that an unreasonable search? And like I said, the courts have overwhelmingly ruled that it's not an unreasonable search. It is not. So the idea that they need a higher standard to pull you over, no. And the idea that they're doing this intrusive search, no. In fact, I'd bet that 99% of the plates that get searched that way, nothing happens as a result, and the people never even know it was done at all, okay? So here's the biggest problem that most people are overlooking, is that your state most likely takes the information in that database that the police officer is looking at, and they probably sell it. They sell it to third parties. They sell it to marketers. They sell it to big corporations. They sell that information. So when you sign up to get a driver's license or a license plate, in most states, much of that information is available. Now, the driver's license stuff got tightened up a little bit, but the license plate and registration stuff, all bets are off. And so I'm going to tell you about a story here from a TV station out of Washington, D.C. Joe Sturman and Alex Brower wrote the article, but this appeared in February, just 2 months ago. Depending on where you live, your DMV may be selling your personal information. Things like your address, phone number, and driver ID number are secrets that we don't normally share with other people. But the investigation conducted by these two discovered the information you hand over to get a license or register your vehicle is actually going to lots of people depending on where you live. Adam Schwartz with the Electronic Frontier Foundation said, this really is a widespread process around the country. It's a serious intrusion on the privacy of the public, and it needs to stop. Schwartz is a senior staff attorney at the EFF, says a federal law passed in 1994 was designed to stop this from happening, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which happened because of the actress Rebecca Schaefer, who was killed by an obsessed fan who got her information from the DMV in California. But unfortunately, the DPPA is riddled with exceptions. The federal DPPA says the government cannot give out information absent the consent of the driver, but there are exceptions, okay? The exception he's talking about happened at the state level, where different privacy laws govern who can legally get access to your information, either in bulk or individually. They contacted the DMVs in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. to find out the rules that govern how they handle your information. They asked each agency which information is for sale or available for release, who can buy it, and whether they make a profit from the sale. From the 20 states that responded, 30 states didn't even bother responding because the answers are probably bad. The team found it's fairly standard for your information to be made available to law enforcement, insurance companies, and vehicle manufacturers trying to track down to inform you about vehicle recalls. But they also discovered some surprising organizations that are allowed to buy your data in various states, including private investigators, security companies, commercial data brokers, collection agencies, private billing companies, alumni groups, targeted advertising firms, bulk marketers, and more. The specifics about what can be shared were found in state codes and responses supplied by the agencies who were answering the questions asked. Schwartz said the practice, which is well-intentioned for something like a vehicle recall notice, is still problematic at its core. Information should not be shared or used for a different reason without getting the informed consent of the individual. In most cases, they learned that you cannot opt out. And even when you do opt out, like in Tennessee, it's not a blanket opt out. They found that when they press the agency in charge of driver's information, for instance, the state gives drivers a couple of options for consenting to release their information when applying for a license. But a reporter discovered the state still sells the information to 5 companies, even after the drivers have said they want to opt out. So, in case you're curious, if you've moved recently, watch how fast the junk mail starts coming to you addressed properly. And that's because the state sells your information, your utilities might sell your information, other companies you deal with sell your information. And there are no secrets on the internet anymore. And the scary part is that everyone is getting bent out of shape based on the comments underneath my last video about how a police officer can drive behind you and see your license plate, which is visible to the world, type it in, and find out very quickly information about you. But that information is sitting in a database. And the database is there for a reason. However, the database shouldn't be there to be sold to other people. And the idea that they sell it to other people, that is more offensive to me than the police officer driving behind me running my plate. Now, I understand. I can't speak for everyone. It might bother you more that a police officer ran your plate than the state sold all your information to a bunch of marketers, a bunch of polling firms, private investigators. That might not bother you. And again, everyone has different thresholds for what bothers them. Sometimes my threshold's kind of low. Sometimes it's kind of high. I do recall a moment in time, though, when a few years ago, they were doing a little investigation on this. And they were talking about who has the information and where does it get out. And there are a couple websites on the internet where they'll tell you for a small fee, you can type in anybody's name and find out anything you want about them. Companies are there. They've been there for a while. So they dragged a bunch of these people into Congress and made them testify about where they get their information. Every single one of them took the fifth because they're all breaking the law. You can go to the DMV and say you are one of those entities allowed to get the information, and they'll give it to you. I can tell you there are digital services out there where you can get access to government information, and you pay a monthly subscription fee, basically, for access to these databases. And when you log in, it'll actually ask you, what purpose are you going to put these to? There's a bunch of check boxes, and everyone knows. Pick one, boom, and you're in. Now, is that right? Should civilians be allowed to just tap into these databases? But they can, and the states are doing it for money. So here's what I have to say to you, if you've made it this far. There's a database with all this information in it, held by the state. Once in a while, a police officer will look at a license plate and search the database. Police officer will look at it, make a decision, and then probably move on to the next license plate. Meanwhile, that same database is being sold wholesale to businesses and other entities around the country for money. The money is going to the state. You make nothing off it except that your privacy has been totally infringed upon. And that's the real problem here. So as far as the law goes, the police can run your plates all day long. Not much you can do about that. The Supreme Court's ruled on it repeatedly and said that the standard for what they need to do to pull over somebody in traffic is very low. And running your plates is not that big of an intrusion in your privacy, especially because most times, like I said, you don't even know it happened. But the bigger insult here, the bigger problem here is what the states do with the information that they've got in those databases and the fact that they sell it to people without your permission. And even in the states where you've opted out, they still sell it, which is weird to begin with. So that to me is a real problem. But in the short answer to the question about what the police officers can do, legally, the police can run your plate anytime they want, and it's not a violation of your constitutional rights, because your constitutional rights come from the Fourth Amendment, and there you are secure against unreasonable searches. And the courts have repeatedly ruled that it is not an unreasonable search of you for the police officer to search the database made by the state. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Oh, you're going to need a bigger boat.